a leader, if you were working on the wrong issues, would you want to know? Our guest today is Dan Tocchini. He has been helping leaders transform their teams for over 35 years. And he has worked with executive teams from Interstate Batteries and ESPN to Smarty Pants Vitamins and Impulse Space, and as well as nonprofits like Homeboy Industries and Defy Ventures. And today we're going to talk about what it means to be a courageous leader. We're going to talk about culture, creative conflict resolution, and how to ensure that you're actually focusing on the real issues that are going to move the needle in your organization. So I'm really excited to have Dan here today. Dan, welcome to Leaders Transformation.
Oh, thank you, Nicole. What a pleasure to be here. Great connecting with you again.
Yes, yes. And that's the thing is that, having heard you 25 years ago and then having this conversation now, I am just so excited for this. Like when I saw that actually, let's do a shout out also for Podcast Virtuoso, because they're the ones that connected us and connected me to Adrian Kaler, who's been on this show twice. We did a two-part series with him, and they connected us, and I was like, absolutely, no question, I want to have you on the show, because I just remember the impact that you had on me 25 years ago and on my family and in our organization back then. And so I'm looking forward to catching up with you now and seeing where you're at, and also, just diving into this conversation around culture, which is so important these days.
Well, I look forward to it. So
yeah. Well, let's start off. Yeah, let's start off with something that I saw in the material that I got from you for your team was that you said that we are all criminally minded. What did you mean by that?
Well, I actually, what I say is we are all criminals. Just some of us are more arrestable than others. And
okay.
Look, we have a view of ourselves.
Yes.
There's William Glasser said that human beings their view of themselves, it ranges from fantasy to flattery to pure fantasy. And we have a pretty good view of ourselves. We like to see ourselves as the good guy. You can understand why. And the brain's an interesting machine. It'll do what you tell it to do. So if I tell myself I'm really a good guy, then anything I do that isn't good or doesn't help other people, doesn't actually takes away from their well-being, I'm probably not going to see it, and I'm probably going to justify it away, because that's the brain's job, is to make me right about I'm a good guy. So then we tend to infringe or treat other people the way we wouldn't want to be treated, and the moment we do that, we start creating a criminal mindset. And the work I've done with criminals, I've done a lot of work with people who have committed crimes, who have a history with. I've worked with gang members coming out of gangs, created a curriculum for an organization called Straight Ahead Ministries in the East Coast. I think it's the most studied program out there. It's the recidivism rate they've got is about 12%, juxtaposed against the cultural's 84, 86%. And one of the things kind of the foundation of that program and the foundation of all the work that we do is that if you look at, there's a kind of a continuum that we relate to the world on, and and it ranges from victim, kind of being a victim to life and circumstances. I'm constantly reacting to them. The circumstances are the reason I am the way I am, and we all suffer. We've all been through suffering, some people more than others. But the criminal mind starts to perpetrate or take advantage, leverage that thinking to get what they want. So if I'm a victim and I'm way over on the victim side, and I've been victimized, but I continue to relate as a victim, because we do get victimized. Things happen to us we didn't have anything to do with. But if I relate to it afterwards, if I continue to see that, I'll get bitter. If I don't seek some way to forgive, to kind of free myself from the situation, not live the rest of my life trying to keep it from happening. What I'll tend to do is I'll start perpetrating if I continue to indulge it, because I have a justification to go forward and do that, and to do what was done to me. After all, something was taken from me. I deserve to take it from other people. So there's an underlying entitlement. And that we can stand on if we choose to, and justify actions we would never want done to us, if that makes sense.
Yes, actually, it reminds me of a book that I read called Unpunishable. And he was talking about this idea that we want others to be punished because ultimately we feel that we need to be punished or have been punished.
Oh,
Yeah.
now you're talking Dostoyevsky. Yeah, I don't know if you've ever read Crime and Punishment, but
No.
Raskolnikov, I can never say the name of the main character, Raskolnikov or whatever. He was a criminal, and the whole story is about how he was arrested and how he was caught, and ultimately how he wanted to be caught. And that's one of the things that we want to know, that people see us. And if I'm a criminal, if I'm living a double life, and let's say you and I were partners in a business, and I was carrying on a criminal life on the side, and you didn't know it. I want to know that you see me. And if you don't see me, I'll start to have contempt towards you. I'll feel shame, and then I'll feel contempt towards you because you can't see me, and you say you know me, or you say you love me, or you like me, or we're in business, and yet you can't see what I'm doing. So there's an underlying contempt for other people. And
Yeah.
if when you work with people who have fully given themselves to that mindset, you're always coming up against their tests. You're always a mark until they own the way they think. And that takes some real work. And there's a couple of psychologists who just blazed the path in that area. They're dead now. Yokelson and Samenow. They wrote a book, they wrote a series of 3 books, The Criminal Personality, and it covers the psychological development and what happens in organizations, and then how drugs and alcohol play into it as well. And it's really good treatise.
Yeah, this is interesting because as we're talking about leadership and culture and organizations, this so applies. And we're talking about, from the extreme, but even so, I think about how many times do leaders and or people in organizations have contempt for someone else because they're not being seen. They lack that respect. So maybe talk about what you've seen, how that translates into organizations, into leadership and culture, corporate culture. And yeah, I mean, I've on this show, we've had over 475 amazing guests, and many of them are leadership consultants. And I've often thought, okay, with all of these amazing leadership consultants, because that's just like a tiny fraction of all the leadership consultants that are out there working within companies, why do we have so many messed up companies? Because there's something deeper than all of that that's going on that we need to address. And I think that you're able to do that.
Well, there's a couple of things we do that I think really differentiate us. I can come in and give you 50 frameworks. I can go through a number of frameworks, and there are great teachers that'll come in and teach frameworks. But what really needs to happen is that the framework is helpful because it brings distinction to the conversation, but it takes courage to address the issues that people that don't want to address. In other words, think of culture like a table, and on the top of the table is everything, like we have cups and so on, things we accept amongst each other to discuss. Then there are things under the table that we don't talk about, and these are things that we don't just go out, well, we don't talk about this. We give all kinds of different indicators, signs, ways of communicating that this is not okay to talk about. So it goes under the table. And I've been, so when I'm talking about this, I'm confessing. I'm not saying, oh, look what people do. I've noticed myself at times doing this. In fact, I've blown up companies, my own lost situations because I didn't address what was under the table. We see it and we go, oh, I don't want to disturb we're getting a lot done. Nicole's doing a really good job, and I see this little thing over here that just is incongruent and indicates that there's something going on that, you can intuit it, but I don't want to break your stride. Hell, you're producing, you're a good widget. And I don't want this tool not to continue to produce, if I put it in the most frank terms.
Yeah.
And then what I do is I avoid it and it begins to grow. Now, when we work with culture, we use the frameworks to identify the things that aren't being talked about that are actually running the culture.
What's an example of that?
So I'm working with a client now, a fairly high profile organization, and they shoot rockets into space, and if you make a mistake while you're building the rocket, then the rocket is going to blow up. It's going to cost millions of dollars. So if I'm working with my team, and let's say I have a structural engineer who is really brilliant, but they come from another industry, and I really like them because they're great at designing some craft. They're a structural engineer. They design craft well, and they did it in another vertical, in like the race car industry, let's say. And now I've hired them over here, and I've worked with SpaceX, and I have a very clear way of doing things because it works, and we've developed things that work in space, so we want to follow the system. So the guy who is the structural engineer doesn't like SpaceX and doesn't want to do it that way. But I don't want to talk to him, because if I do, I could disturb him and he may not deliver what I want. But then again, what I'm not paying attention to is if he's not coordinating with the other engineers, if he's not delivering what they expect in the order that they expect it, if he's not as meticulous as they are because of experience, then what he creates may have problems. Like one of the things, like, and these engineers of this organization have addressed this other engineer about their concern about what's not getting done because they don't have a view into it, and he doesn't want to give them a view into it because to him he's doing the right thing and he's victimized by these guys. And then when they get together and they put the rocket together or the spaceship together that's going to be taken to space, if these things aren't done, there's a strong chance it'll fail. It'll fall apart, because there are certain dynamics that in a design that need to be, like the types of welds, there's all kinds of things they need to inspect. And if they don't get to inspect them and they put up with it, then they are complicit in the failure, even though they'll want to blame him. Right. So our getting in the middle of that's a situation that with this organization we got in the middle of, is we had to open up what I call the cat in the room. It's a metaphor, and I kind of talk about it with these guys. It's a neuroscientific kind of study about what motivates people, and they use mice because mice have a very similar nervous system, and they tie weights to the mice tail, and then they put cheese at the end of the tube, and about 40% of the mice will drag that weight up to get the cheese. The others don't. But if they bring a cat into the room in a cage and they put it right behind the mice, all the mice get to the cheese. They've discovered that humans are 5 times more likely to move to prevent something horrible from happening than they are to produce something wonderful. Right. So part of the dance is
that
to get
pain
clear
or pleasure. Yeah,
that's right. And what most organizations do well, or most coaching companies do well, is we get clear about the vision. We get the cheese all lined out, but we don't tend to like to go into what's the cat in the room. How are you currently relating to what you're doing in a way that's going to produce pain for you, at an exponential level if you don't correct at this point. And if you've done a great job of designing the cheese, you get nervous about disrupting that sense of excitement and hype. We've all done it, made super commitments, and then what have we done? We weren't up for the price. We weren't willing to pay the price. So we go after the current reality now, and we open it up in a way that people can get a sense of, if we continue to operate this way, what future is attached to these choices. And that brings the cat into the room and actually brings the tension up. and things that are under the table come to the surface, and we tend to clear the path pretty well. And people tend to really, at first it's like a hot bath that hurts, and then they go, oh, this is good. We see, because we stay hard on the problem, and we invite people in. We want to be shoulder to shoulder, soft on people, hard on the problem. And the more we get on the problem and they see that we're just about committed to them winning, because I'll say to them, at some point, we're going to have an argument. And I'm going to be arguing for your ability to do what you think is impossible. And you're going to be arguing with me about the limitations. Who do you want to win? Right? I like to preempt that, because when it comes up, I go, here we are. I'm talking about what's possible, and you're telling me it's not. Okay, good. Who do you want to win?
So that's interesting, because, we talk about this motivation to avoid pain versus seeking pleasure. We are all, whether it's that we're conditioned that way or hardwired from, as human beings that way. Now in that, how do you, you just talk about how you do that, because you talk about what's possible. So at some point you are shifting their focus. You're addressing this pain. Yep. And you're saying, okay, we can't ignore this, and we got to look at the consequences of what's happening. So that gets them moving towards the cheese, if you will. Yeah. And then there's this shift that happens towards what's possible. How do you make that shift? And when do you make that? When is it safe to make that shift to have them moving towards what's possible, so that they're not constantly in the mode of always avoiding? And that was just like a negative,
well,
environment.
That's a great question. So it's a little more sophisticated, it's more sophisticated than people want to think about. But if I put it in kind of a map, one, you want to be clear about the cheese, because that's the context of the mission, right? Mm-hmm. That's the context of all what we're doing. And what I do is I ask people, where is the future? Like, where is the future located? And most people will say in their mind, which is, yeah, okay, but it's not a powerful answer. There's no power in that answer. How do I get at what's in my mind? Where in my mind, if you will? Like, that's very metaphorical. It's very nominalized. You can't put your hands on it. Mm-hmm. So what I would say is the future, and what isn't yet, right? That's the future. What isn't yet is in language. It's in the language. And so what we do is we have people notice their language. Because one of the things, there's a couple of neuroscientific principles that none of us get a vote on. One is, you always make the best choice you see available. Everybody does. We don't get up in the morning and go, today I'm going to make the second and third best choices I see available. Our brain's wired for survival. So we're always making the best choice we see available, which doesn't mean we're making the best choice. We're just making the best choice we see.
Yes.
And so
what do we see? Yeah.
That's right. And then when we see it and we make the choice, and somebody says, well, wow, there might be a better choice, we have a tendency to want to convince them of our perception. So we prove and protect our perception. And there's a secret weapon. The secret weapon is, can you look at other perspectives? Are you willing to consider other perspectives about this vision, and notice when they come up, what you do. Do you go to learn and transform, or do you go to protect, prove, and protect? Because what I usually do is let people give me the whole proof, so they feel good. I see. So this is what you're saying. Yes. Okay, good. Now I know, if they're anything like me and I'm on prove and protect, if somebody introduces something that's other than what I'm trying to prove and protect, I'm going to have a rebuttal to move it back into my perception. Yes. So I ask, it's an there's all kinds of interesting neurological studies about people and how they learn. And if you have a phobia, or you're afraid of something happening, if you keep looking into it, it'll go away. But you have to voluntarily look into it. So I'll ask them, if it wasn't the way you thought it was, and I'll name it specifically, would you want to know? And that, I want to get their permission. If they say yes, I go, now I'm going to offer a different perspective. I'm not asking you to give up your perception. I'm asking you to add to it or consider what opens up from these other perspectives. And they'll say, okay, I'm open. I'll say, well, why don't you try it first? Why don't you tell me something that's as true or even more relevant than what you just said that could be going on that you're not paying attention to? Now, if they can't do it, then I'll offer them 2 or 3 possibilities or have somebody else on the team do that. And then they get a chance to see other perspectives. The minute you start doing that, if they consider it, what will occur is their amygdala will relax. And the neocortex, the part of us that makes choice and that can govern and see beyond just what we see, starts to engage. And that's when we can open up new possibility. So it's within the context of the vision. I want to listen to their language. I want to hear how they're positioning themselves in the problem. Like, are they defending? Like, if it's not working, are they defending what isn't working? And if they are, I'm interested. Why are they doing that? Maybe they see something I don't, but at least I'm going to learn how they see the world. And then while they're doing that, I might see other possibilities. And then I can set up a voluntary inquiry into the other perspectives that I could offer or that the team can offer. But first, they got to get clear where they are. They got to get that I hear their perception, and then we can open up a possibility. And when we do that, a lot opens up because other perspectives bring issues from under the table to the surface that are relevant to the mission. There's inevitably other people that have concerns that are working from different perspectives on the team who have dependencies with each other. And that brings those things. There's a natural tension because they're there to accomplish something. That's a lot of words. I hope that made sense.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. And I'm thinking that in terms of culture, you're creating a culture of curiosity, right? Of unprecedented future, of the possibility for an unprecedented future, the possibilities of maybe a different perspective. And how do you, when you're going into organizations that are set and, and maybe they haven't worked in they haven't had these conversations and in this way ever. And now you're bringing this in. How do you, I see how you can open up that conversation for them. How do you help them to sustain that? Well, without having like the decades of experience that you have, and of course in being able to create that environment?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, that has been a challenge, but what we do is we map their culture, and we have a very powerful way of mapping the culture so they can see it. And we can illuminate 12 distinct paradoxes. So a paradox is seemingly opposite things, like seemingly opposite conditions that are interdependent. And the tendency for entrepreneurs and young founders is they often want to get rid of the tension rather than learn how to navigate it. And that's part of maturity. So for instance, if let's say here's a paradox. It's called the coaching paradox, right? So the coaching paradox is enforcement and warmth and empathy, right? They are opposite, but they are interdependent. If I'm not warm and empathic with you, you're probably not interested in what I have to enforce because you don't get, I care for you, right? Yes. And so if I'm high on, let's say think of a graph, and enforcement's on the vertical, that's the action, and warmth and empathy is the support. If I'm high on enforcement and low on warmth and empathy, I'm going to come across harsh. So the tendency will be that people won't tell me things unless they go the way I want them to go, or they'll make shit up and they'll make it look like it's going in that direction. If I'm long on warmth and empathy and low on enforcement, I'm going to be permissive. And so people will think whatever they're doing is okay. So when I do start to enforce, they're going to be confused, right? So I want to be high on both so that people get, I care about them, and I care about them doing well in this work because I know it's going to be rewarding. I can invent narratives that they get why I'm doing it, and that they're part of it, and I'm shoulder to shoulder with them. So we identify the culture, and we lay it out over these 12 paradoxes, which helps the individuals make kind of depersonalize the breakdowns and see new ways to deal with them. When anybody sees a new way to deal with something that they've been chronically complaining about, they get excited and want to give it a shot. So part of coaching, as you know, is creating a new possibility. And if people see it, they're going to want to go back and get involved in what they normally have been trying to escape because they don't see any possibility.
Oh,
So
this is so
it
good.
chunks down to
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, this is so good. I'm curious from your own experience. I mean, how did you get into this work, and even for yourself? Because you talk about, I'm talking to myself as I'm talking to everyone else, and and so maybe give us a little bit of a sense of how you kind of found your way into this work.
It goes back to my childhood. I grew up with a manic depressive schizophrenic mother. And at age 12, she went catatonic. And we'd had issues with her for about 3 years after my youngest brother was born. And, we were a very tight family. My mother not particularly was tight with all of us. My dad was more of an absentee father, home, great guy, took us on trips, but we rarely saw him in between trips, and briefly saw him at home, and he was the disciplinarian. And so there was a lot of tension in the house. And I think, in long time talking to her, she says that tension, she kind of didn't think she had a way out or a way to discuss it. And she claims she changed her own chemistry by just the pressure she put herself under. But I learned to go between her and the doctors because she was catatonic, come out and would hurt herself. And then they were talking about doing a lobotomy because that's what they did in the early 60s. And my dad and we talked a lot about it because I was visiting her a lot. And we decided, I talked him into giving me a shot to talk to her before they did something like that, and was able to communicate in a way that she came out of the catatonia, started talking. And so I spent a lot of time going in between. I say that because it wasn't, it was really rough. I left home at a young age, 16, and started to go do things, and became criminal, angry, resentful, but voracious reader, because I learned to read to connect with my mother. I read all kinds of neuroscientific books. I read an article that became a book by a guy named Charles Schraz called The Myth of Mental Illness. And it opened up something to me I'd never seen before, which was, what if people who are mentally ill are actually speaking another language and we just don't understand it? Which really helped me talk with my mother, communicate with her, look at her signs. She used to symbolize and would freak the family out, but I could tell she was trying to say something. So I was trying to figure the symbols out. And when I read this book, or it was an article, became a book later on. I read it in 1964. It was an article. A friend of mine gave it to me at the hospital, said, check this out. Tell me if it helps you. It really helped me with who I'm with. And it really helped me. And I talked about it. Nobody in my family was really interested, but I've always been very interested in that. So I started doing it as I got older, and I got involved with drugs, and I had an addiction, and I've been clean now for 40 years, almost 40 years, 39 years.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
So
Yeah.
in recovering from that, I started realizing I positioned myself with my mother as a victim. It's rather than how could I re-mean that past? What did I learn from that past? Look at all we accomplished. And then I started seeing what a beautiful mother she was, because even though she had the condition, she still took great care of us. It wasn't like we were abused. Some psychological stuff, which I think also helped prepare us. But it helped me see that there were a lot of beautiful things I drew from that later on served me. So that's part of our work is, the past, you don't go to the past, it comes up in the moment. And when it does, it's now the present. And I can look back and see, like, if you're married, you know what I mean? How often do I react to my spouse in ways I'd react to my parents as a kid? I'm no longer a kid. What happened there? What did I make up about what happened there, more importantly? And how can I re-mean it so I can be free to try new things, to work on new possibilities here? And that's a neuroscientific principle. There's a great book out called Deviate by Bo Lotto. And he talks about the science of creating a new future, because our brain always looks to the past first to create the future. And if the future I want is conflicted with the past I've invented in my own mind, then I'm going to have a dissonance and not be able to accomplish it. You'll see a pattern of failure that looks the same in different contexts. That means there's something I've made up that I'm afraid of. I'm a mammal and I won't go any further. So I've got to, when it comes up, I got to recognize it and re-mean it because it's connected to something I made up about my past, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. And I can see how even in my own life, it's like, okay, it's so relevant to relationships, to business, to every area of our lives. It was interesting what you were talking about with the past and the future is that it's not, you re-mean it. Sometimes we think we need to heal it and go back and do all that work. And
that's all, it's language. We're in language. And so the metaphors don't help. They help in the sense of you can nail what is going on in a way that you can feel. I can feel your metaphor, right? I can put myself in the metaphor, but to transform it, I've got to get into the language, and that's a very interpersonal thing. That's very personal. So you have got to have a level of trust with me that by the way I'm with you, you're willing yourself to look. Because if you're concerned about me with you, you're not going to want to get vulnerable to yourself. You're going to want to protect yourself from what you feel I am trying to do with you. Maybe you feel like I'm trying to, hurt you or use you or manipulate you. Well, in that case, you're not going to want to look. So my way of being, my presence, no matter what frameworks I have, you've seen this. You see somebody give a great presentation, but people don't trust them enough to engage the frameworks, right?
Yes.
And it's one of the things I think Tony Robbins is very good at. He creates such trust. People engage the frameworks in a very interpersonal way, a very personal way, and they see change. I know I did, and I do.
Yeah.
I really like his work. I think he's a phenomenal guy. And his presence is really phenomenal to me. Yeah. It's a very inviting, challenging, inviting, supportive, committed to my future, not looking. I don't get an agenda from him. I know he's selling his programs, but he's straight up about it. It's not like he's trying to manipulate me into them. I really admire his work. I admire who he is.
Yeah. Well, and he talks about this whole idea of us being meaning-making machines, which is what you've been talking about. And we're making it up all the time. I mean, it's funny. Like if you're going to live by a story, well, make it a good one.
Make it a good one. If you're going to fail magnificently, for God's sake. Let's have some fun. Yeah. Absolutely. We only here for a short while. Yeah.
Oh, this is so good, Dan. There's so many ways that we can go about this. I think this is a next level. I mean, I thought this conversation was going to be about culture and leadership and business, but it's also what you're talking about is from a coaching perspective for the coaches, which leaders are coaches, is to take it to a whole other level of who do we need to be able to be an effective catalyst for that change to happen, for that discovery to happen within someone else. We're not doing it. It's just creating that space for them to feel safe enough to look, feel vulnerable enough to actually look at what is and not what they think it is, or looking at a different perspective. So powerful.
Challenge what they think it is. Like it's a series. I'm really quite, it's an inquiry. How do I separate what I'm making up about it from what it is? And that's the first step if you're going to lead. A lot of people are leading, but where are they leading people to? And self-mastery is the first thing. I've got to master my own conversation, who I am in the moment with people, in order to lead them in a way that's healthy and powerful and transformative. And if I'm not doing the work, mastering myself, they're going to know that. And if I can't receive their correction, they're going to know that, right? It's like leadership isn't I'm always leading. I know when it's time for you to lead, and I can get behind and follow you with the same enthusiasm I would if I'm leading, right?
Yes.
And any team ought to be like that. If the leader has to have all the answers, then they're going to produce a sense of loneliness that they can't get away from. But if they really are leading in a way that they're managing themselves, then they're going to impart that to their team, and the team's going to thank them for it. One of the best things I've ever heard from our clients is you know, one gal said to me, I used to hate to come to work here. I love coming to work here now because what I learn here and what we do here benefits my family when I go home. And that's what I think, and that's the integration of work and life, right? And not
Yes.
work-life balance. Integrate work and life so that both support each other, contribute to each other. And then when you need more time on one side, you've got the support because there's a contribution going both ways and it's acknowledged.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of like the separation of work and home. It doesn't happen. It's like leave your humanity at home. That doesn't work that way. And what you're talking about is creating an environment where, like you talk about leadership, and what are we called to do as leaders? Where are we leading them? It's like leadership is yes, there's a mission, there's a vision that we're creating from a business perspective, and leadership truly is about bringing out the best in people, and that is going to spill over to other areas of their life. And whether or not they're there for a short time or a long time, that they had an impact because they connected you, they were interacted with you, they were led by you in some way, if that makes
Well,
sense.
you brought it up, and I think it was the pre-show conversation about being a context or a container, right?
Yes.
And that's what mastery does, right? It helps you create a bigger container so you can hold more, and you can get into a circumstance that's conflicted and hold it until you find the possibility. And I mean, you were talking about that before the show. It was really empowering. I mean, it's a great metaphor if you think about it.
Yes, absolutely. And so often we try to operate in these tiny containers, and other people try to put us, through conditioning, or they try to put us in that container. They want us to buy into this tiny container. And then we wonder why we can't get the results. Is because, we're in the container is too small for us. All the roots are sticking out the bottom and growing out the holes.
Yeah, a lot of consulting companies I noticed in the past, they want to make like I've got to be the expert rather than a catalyst. I'd rather be a catalyst than an expert.
Yes.
And a catalyst is I'm willing to have the conversations no one's willing to have. I'm willing to correct myself along the way. I want to invite people. I want to get the team side by side, all eyes on the same problem. That's much more exciting than having the answer in my book. That's where we find all of that creativity and innovation.
Yes.
And I think that's why we do well with the engineering. We have a lot of engineering companies or companies birthing things. We do well with them because this mindset supports innovation. It supports transformation and high velocity change.
I love that. So that's a great opportunity, great place where we can talk about your book, The Change Imperative, which is an free ebook on your website. Amazing. I was telling you how, I read that book and immediately I was like, I know a client who needs to read this book, and they did, and they loved it, and they've been sharing it with others. And it's just so, so powerful, short, succinct, very power packed. In terms of change management. And you also have, of course, the Naked Leadership podcast, which you co-host with Adrian, and your website, takenewground.com. What is it, the ebook that would be the first place to start, or what would be the first place to start? If you had a organization, some leaders out there and saying, oh my goodness, you know what, we have a lot under the table that we haven't addressed, and we need to bring somebody in, a catalyst that can come in to bring that to the surface in a safe way, where would they start?
I would say start the podcast. I think is the most, it's easy. There's a lot of variety. I love the episode 130. It's with a guy we trained in prison.
And I listened to that one. Yes.
Yeah. Richard Morales. And we've done that in corporations, right? Where we work with a team and they turn things around. And it's just amazing what he's done with the group of guys we trained in prison are now out, and they're written into the California budget at like $35 million a year to help prevent guys from going to prison and help guys come back into society in a very unique, positive way. And it's one of the most, it's touching. It gives people an insight. But that's usually the one I'd look at. And then the change imperative, if you're looking at making change, it's definitely will help you think about what you're probably going to face along the way and give you language, which is a big deal, of how to talk about it and think about it with your team and how to identify the levelers and then, and know what to do with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Dan, thank you so much. I could talk to you and listen to you for hours. And I just so appreciate you being here and giving us a little bit of a taste, a deep dive, but that quick little, this taste of the kind of work that you do in organizations to create unprecedented futures, to create change within organizations, the transformation, the true transformation. And that's just, yeah, it's gold. So thank you.
I'm honored and blessed. Thank you for inviting me. And it's beautiful to see people who appreciate your work. It doesn't get better than that. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Well, is there anything I should ask you that before we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't talk about that would be important to talk about in this context of the conversation that we've had?
Well, there's a whole section that comes up around mourning and grieving. Because teams go through that, individuals go through that. And I don't think there's a real consciousness in the corporate world about how powerful that can be, how important that can be for bonding a team. And so I think, that's a whole nother topic we can have a conversation about. I know I've recently gone through mourning. I lost a grandson in January and really pulled my family together for 2 months. And we, just mourned and we, grieve over what's lost and mourn over what will never be. And look, my saying is most people don't do this, but it goes along with that, what I talked about. When you look into something that you're afraid of and you look into it long enough, something bigger than what you're afraid of comes out of you and out of, in your language and the way you think about it. And the key is, can you look into the abyss long enough that something bigger comes out of you, that you're now willing to move into it instead of away from it. And I know in where we're headed as a society, I honestly believe that's going to be a crucial discipline, practice, way of thinking and behaving in the world. So
that is so good. And we may have to have you back to talk a little bit more about that.
Well, please, I love talking with you.
Yeah, I can relate to that as well. And I know there's a lot of people that are going through that. Yeah, so I can see that. So Dan, thank you so much. And for the listeners that are out there, I always say leaders of transformation take action. And sometimes that action isn't just going and doing more things. It's stopping and looking and taking a moment to see, to look into that abyss, to look into the thing that you fear. And long enough, I love what you said there, Dan, about, long enough that something greater comes out of it. And what a blessing that is. What an amazing, the potential that comes out of that is just incalculable. So I would encourage you to do that. Take action on something that you heard today. And as a listener out there, and maybe it's listening to this again and just letting it absorb, and just maybe, listening to the leadership podcast, Naked Leadership Podcast, getting the ebook, start immersing yourself in this conversation so that you can see new possibilities as a leader, as somebody in a relationship with another person, or many people within your organization. This is the work that creates transformation. And so I encourage you to do that. We'd love to hear your stories. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com. We want to support you. If there's anything we can do to support you, let us know. And of course, you can find us on social. And thanks for being here. And we look forward to seeing you next week on another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Thank you, Dan, so much.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.